putting the Chicago Bulls to the side, who recently improved to 4-0, mind you, we're going to talk about my Brooklyn Nets. Because as it stands, after beating the Washington Wizards on Monday, the Brooklyn Nets are sitting at just 2-2. It's been a very, very rocky start to begin the season. They beat Philadelphia miraculously because Doc Rivers kind of just like fucked up everything at the end of the game for them. They also beat, oh, I already mentioned Washington, but they lost to Indiana. No, they lost to Charlotte, which was just that was an unacceptable loss. It was just it was horrible. It was horrible. It was a just awful game from the Brooklyn Nets all around, particularly in the fourth quarter. And the opening night loss to Milwaukee was not a fun experience as well. There are a lot of things going on with this team, and there are a lot of issues that are popping up with this team. The biggest one is, believe it or not Kyrie Irving. I understand that fans want Kyrie Irving to come back because Kyrie will help fix some of the issues offensively. But as we saw with the game against the Wizards yesterday, the Nets offense at this point, it's just them trying to dial in a rhythm. And ultimately, you still have Kevin Durant, who is that guy you can give the ball to and just be like, hey, get a bucket. I can't count how many times I've seen Kevin Durant just take someone one-on-one off the dribble this year or back him down in the post. And if he gets, even like 6 inches of airspace on a mid-range jumper, it's cash. It's cash. There's a reason he's averaging 33 points a game, and I think he's only shooting like 35% from three or something. He's shooting 33% from three. So KD's actual numbers to start the year, 31 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists, shooting 56% from the field overall. And that includes his 33.3% clip from three. Collectively, Brooklyn ranks 23rd and 22nd in scoring volume and scoring efficiency, respectively. And a lot of this, it really is just rhythmic. There are a lot of guys missing easy shots. I'm talking about Joe Harris. I'm talking about James Harden, who I think is the biggest detriment to the Nets offense right now. And I'm not saying that because I think he's a bad player, because obviously he's not. This is the same dude who just a few months ago was vital in keeping the Nets afloat while Kyrie was out and while KD was out. They went like 25-5, I think, with James Harden after getting him from Houston last season. And I'm not going to bring up the postseason, but we all know what would have happened if James Harden was healthy in the postseason. But right now, as it stands, James Harden is playing so below his production line. This man just looks like thick Sasha Brown. He's at like 17 points, 8 assists, committing almost 5 turnovers a night, and shooting below 35% from the floor. Oh, I'm sorry. He's shooting 36% from the floor, 32% from 3, 40% from 2. Now, what do I think is the issue with James Harden? I think the issue is that he's simply not ready to play meaningful NBA basketball at this time. I forgot what telecast I was watching. It was either Philly or Milwaukee. And one of the commentators brought up how James Harden hasn't really been he hasn't had much basketball activity leading up into the season because he had to recover from the hamstring injury that he was recovering from before Kyrie got hurt in the Eastern Conference semifinals. So the Nets had to bring him back prematurely. And, of course, we all know how that went. James Harden was playing on one leg. It was some of the worst basketball he's ever played, but considering the context, it couldn't have gone much better. And then all throughout the summer, spends time rehabilitating that hamstring, doesn't really participate much in training camp or the preseason. And as we know with these hamstring injuries, they are very, very tricky. Someone on Twitter brought up the fact that it took Chris Paul multiple seasons to fully come back from that hamstring injury. And mind you, neither Chris Paul or James Harden are these super athletic, these crazy high jumpers, these super fast sprinters. They are much more reliant on changing paces and switching gears seamlessly and very quickly. Prime James Harden is one of the shiftiest players the NBA has ever seen, and that's with him being thick. That's with him having that Krispy Kreme dumpy. he is so reliant on being able to change direction and change speed, but the hamstring is limiting that. And it's limiting that because there really is no way to recover from a hamstring injury. You really just need to rest. And of course, that is all dependent on how severe the hamstring strain was. And it's really just dependent on how severe the hamstring strain is. And going from what he looked like last season, it had to have been not an enjoyable experience for him. Another thing, the decision making from James Harden is particularly poor to begin the season. There were multiple times throughout the first two games where I'm watching him attack the basket, and he has a good floater. He has his man on his hip. He's attacking. The big is a little bit pushed back because if they're playing with Nick Claxton or Blake Griffin, the big does have to respect the alley-oop because in terms of skill, James Harden is still a very good passer. He's still a very good floor general and someone who reads the floor very, very nicely. But he's still passing up these floaters for passes that don't have any airspace, whether it's a bounce pass at Nick Claxton's ankles or whether it's a lob that Nick Claxton isn't able to go up and get. Same thing with Blake Griffin. The decision making for me is what hampers Brooklyn more than anything else because you can't be turning the ball over when your defense is as dog shit as theirs is right now. They are not very good defensively. They're very out of sync. There were multiple instances to begin the season where guys are just not playing with a lot of effort. Claxton not playing with effort. I've been extra hard on him recently because he's a young guy and I'm a big fan of his. But when you're a young guy getting significant minutes on a championship team, you have to be better. Like you can't be taking plays off. I don't care if you're a second-year player, 12-year player. This goes for James Harden as well. This goes for Kevin Durant. But Kevin Durant, the difference is that he is routinely one of the Nets' better defensive players. Like this guy's rotating over weak side to block. I forgot whose dunk it was. I don't think it was Miles Bridges, but I think someone on the Hornets. He's rotating over weak side to block dunks. I mean, he's getting his hands in the passing lanes. Like he's competing defensively. Like same thing with Javon Carter and Patty Mills. Like if nothing else, just please guys, please compete on the defensive end. Getting back to James Harden, another issue is that the league, as we know, is changing how officials officiate. They're changing certain non-basketball moves. They're trying to apply emphasis on shots that Steph Curry enjoys taking, Chris Middleton enjoys taking, where they pump fake. They are at a disadvantage and the defender maintains good defensive position, but the offensive player initiates the contact. That is ultimately the long-winded way that I was trying to say that. They're trying to crack down on non-basketball moves where the offensive player is going out of his way to initiate contact, like flagrantly. We all know the kinds of plays that I'm talking about. Steph is guilty of it. Chris Middleton's guilty of it. James Harden's guilty of it. All of the great players at one point or another are guilty of trying to exploit this rule. Because as a player, when you're going up against guys that are just as talented as you and teams that are just as good as you, getting 3 extra points can be the difference in the game. Now, to be fair, the referees have done a very nice job of adjusting to the new rules. I do think that I don't want to even say it's a drawback or a setback because, as I've mentioned in the past, like in recent years, the NBA has been very difficult to watch just in terms of the officiating and in terms of the unnecessary foul calls, the constant foul calls, the constant stoppages of play. It's become a little bit of a chore to watch. And I think the referees are using this rule change as a way to kind of more so adapt to the FIBA style of officiating, where there are fewer ticky-tack fouls that are called. Overall, the pace of play is a lot better because you're eliminating these incessant stoppages, because there are fouls committed on every play. Just like in football, there's pass interference committed on every play. There's holding on every play. But you can't go out and call all these penalties because you'll ruin the fan experience and the player experience. It's just you have to pick and choose which is the most flagrant and most detrimental and ultimately the most unfair use of these fouls. Now, James Harden, it has been picked on relentlessly for his rather unique style of play. I can't say that I hate it. I can't say that I like it. He was doing what the rules allowed him to do. Now, James Harden is getting significantly less free throw attempts. Granted, some of this could be a byproduct of the changes to officiating. I also don't want to think that James Harden himself doesn't have anything to do with this, because he's significantly less aggressive, and as we've seen, officials tend to reward players who are more aggressive. Even back in the day, when James Harden was taking all these fouls, there were plenty of instances where he was getting foul calls just as kind of reward for attacking the basket. He's down to 3 free throws attempted per game, so that's 12 through 4 games. This is a guy who was routinely averaging 11 or 12 per game over the last couple of seasons. I don't think that the officials are entirely responsible for James Harden's free throw attempt decrease, but there have been quotes. So, this was written a couple days ago before the game, or this was written before the game last night. It was either after the Hornets game or the Philly game. Someone asked the Nets in the post-game session how they felt about the new rule changes. Most notably, Harden shot just 1 free throw in 33 minutes against the Hornets, and for the season has combined, or has been to the line just 9 times combined in the Nets' first 3 games. For comparison, he's averaged over 9 free throws per game in 8 of the past 9 seasons. Quote, I feel like he's unfairly become the poster boy of not calling these fouls. Some of them could definitely be fouls still, but they're so alert and aware, and he's the poster child of these new decisions. I get it. There's a line, but some of them are still fouls. He's just got to stick with it. He's got to keep going to the basket and do what he does, because a large portion of them are still fouls. This is somewhat correct. James Harden is being officiated unfairly. If you watch the Nets games back, you cannot objectively sit there and think that, okay, there haven't been 1 or 2 or 3 instances where James Harden should have gone to the foul line but hasn't, because there has. I've watched almost every minute of these 4 games. There haven't been many instances of Harden being officiated unfairly, but they're there. And it's disingenuous for the refs to single out anybody for playing their game, because admittedly, Harden, as I already mentioned, hasn't been so aggressive, so that's against him as well, but he hasn't really changed his game up otherwise. Like, he's still trying to attack sometimes, even though he is a lot more passive. But there are instances where he goes to the hole and he's slapped on the arm, or the defender doesn't maintain verticality, and he goes and there's just no whistle, and that's simply unfair. And unfortunately, this is kind of what happens when players spend a certain amount of time in the league. James Harden is 32 years old. He's been in the league since he was like 19 or 20. He's been in the league for more than a decade. I feel that around that time, all of the most prominent players are officiated unfairly in comparison to everything else. It happened with LeBron. It's happening with James Harden. It's happened with Steph in the past. It's happened with Kevin Durant. Like, these guys, they're so great. At least in LeBron's case, like, LeBron is so physical and he's so big and strong and athletic that he goes to the line, or he goes to the basket, and it seems like he's not being affected by the defenders when in fact he is. It's just how it is. Same thing with Steph. I mean, Steph is very shifty. He's a very slick ball handler, but sometimes he attacks the basket and he gets bumped and no call. It happens. It happens. It's going to happen with Giannis at some point. It's going to happen with Luka Doncic at some point. It's going to happen with Trae Young at some point as well. I think that plays into it as well. Harden agreed with Nash and then broke out the classic move of saying he didn't want to complain about the issue before doing exactly just that. Everyone does that. I've done this too, where there was, I forgot what episode it was, but I was like, I'm not going to talk about Ben Simmons today. And then immediately after, I spent like 25 minutes talking about Ben Simmons. It's just human nature. Harden's quote, I'm not the type to complain about it. I ask every official if they see a foul, just call a foul. Sometimes I feel like coming into a game, it's already predetermined, or I already have that stigma of getting foul calls. I just ask the officials to call what they see. I can't stop playing basketball. A foul is a foul no matter what league it is, but it's bigger than that. I just got to keep playing. I just got to play better. Obviously, that's it. That's true. Harden definitely has to play better. There are so many issues with his game beyond not getting foul calls. Like, I mean, if he would just make a few more threes, he would instantly help with the Nets' offensive workload at this point. Yeah, I'm not going to hyper-focus on this situation, because ultimately I think that in a little bit, my buddy Justin actually asked me on Twitter, because Mark Stein, who I feel like is starting to grow a massive hate boner for the Brooklyn Nets, was talking about how the Nets were on the verge of going 0-3 if it weren't for a Doc Rivers blunder and, of course, being without Kyrie Irving. And I was just kind of like, hey, stop fucking talking about Kyrie Irving, dude. I don't want to hear anything about Kyrie Irving. He's not playing. He's not affecting the team on the court at this point. I mean, he is, but he's not playing. It should be a non-conversation. Don't talk about Kyrie Irving when you're talking about the Brooklyn Nets, because ultimately you have to address what they're doing on the court right now. And what plays more of a role in their poor performances, aside from Kyrie Irving, is James Harden right now. It's James Harden. It's Joe Harris. It's Steve Nash. Steve Nash has these comically bad rotations at times. He has gotten better. Like, he said he wanted to experiment to begin the season. And Nets Twitter did not take too kindly to that, myself included. I'm like, what works, dude. You know that you have 5 guys. You have Bruce, you have Joe, you have KD, you have James, you have Claxton that are all coming back from last year. You know their games. You know how they're going to play alongside one another. The experimentation comes with Javon Carter, comes with James Johnson, comes with Patty Mills, who has been fucking incredible to begin the season. Comes with Paul Millsap, who's also been great. Comes with LaMarcus Aldridge, who's been great as well. You shouldn't be experimenting with the 5 guys that you already have chemistry with. That doesn't make any sense to me. And to be fair, Steve Nash has begun to get better. I think it was the game against Philly, the fourth quarter, he pretty much just rode LaMarcus Aldridge alongside KD, Harden, Patty Mills, Joe Harris. Those were the guys who got a bulk of the minutes in the fourth quarter. But I'm also like not one to be super reactionary and say fire Steve Nash just because he didn't play Bruce Brown to what I felt was an adequate minute count to begin the season, because that's fucking stupid. You're not going to fire Steve Nash because he's mismanaging his rotations, because guess what, dude? If that were the case, he would have been fired over the summer, because it's the same shit. He's still mismanaging his rotations. But as long as he gets them right at the end of the game, when the games are close, that's all that matters. And guess what? As long as the Nets win basketball games, that's all that matters. And right now, Steve Nash, on top of his minutes thing, has to figure out what's going on defensively. And this is what bugs me the most about when people talk about Kyrie Irving, because all of the issues that Brooklyn is having defensively are going to be amplified if and when Kyrie comes back. No one wants to admit to that, at least publicly, because that's the case. I get that we all want Kyrie back. There was a fucking dumbass protest outside the Barclays Center because of the vaccine mandate. We want Kyrie Irving back, dude. I want Kyrie Irving to help this team win a championship. But as of right now, the Nets don't have him. And the defense is still super atrocious. And I don't know how you fix it, because this has been persistent forever. The Nets have always been a bad defensive team. I really don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like the way their lights are set up at the Barclays Center, or if the players on the opposite team are wearing invisibility cloaks that permits the Nets from seeing them but allows the fans to see them. It's very weird. And it's even weirder because Brooklyn has these bouts of being intense defenders. It happened yesterday. I know the Wizards are not a good offense, but they have weapons. They have Bradley Beal, who's a walking 30-piece. They have Spencer Dinwiddie, who can give you 20 and 7. They have Kyle Kuzma, who can get hot. They have KCP, who is historically a lights-out shooter. They have Montrezl Harrell, who has a motor that just keeps revving. This guy has like 18,000 RPMs inside of him. He's like if a Formula One car was a fucking basketball player. And then Daniel Gafford was torching the team yesterday. Like, the Wizards have weapons, but the Nets were able to string stops together because it comes down to focus and it comes down to effort. And fortunately, I'm not freaking out quite yet, because after all, this is the beginning of the season. A lot of teams are trying to get their sea legs underneath them, including the Lakers, for example. The Lakers are trying to, figure out what the fuck's going on with them, but I'm not worried yet. I probably won't begin to worry until like after Christmas. I feel like Christmas Day is the unofficial start of the NBA season, because that's seemingly when everyone seems to turn it on. The really good teams turn it on before that. Like, they kind of just show up and are already good. So I don't know. Maybe that's the case with the Chicago Bulls. I don't know. We'll have to see. But the Bucks are really going to be in tune by Christmas. think the Lakers, I think that all the contenders, you'll be able to see them reaching their peaks around Christmas or shortly thereafter. So it ultimately just comes down to James Harden playing better and also the bench playing better as well. And then just repetition. I feel like that's the biggest thing for me at this point.